Good morning. I'm so glad you're here with us this week. It's been a kind of a fun New England week this week with, all the snow around us and so forth. I know sometimes snow is a bit of work, but I think that's one of the beauties that we have living here in New Hampshire is that the winter weather itself is just so amazing. Now, this week, we're wrapping up a series that we've actually been in for the past several weeks. And if you remember, the focus of our series has been making the most of the time that we have. And oftentimes, that's the downtime that we have. Now, as you recall, this series is named, Is There a Point to All This? And this week, I want to look at this idea of being prepared for the past. Now, we've all heard of going back to the future, but here we're talking about being prepared for the past. And the thing I want to make clear is that I'm not talking about dwelling on the past, just spending lots of time rehashing the past. What we're looking at here is this idea that we want to take the time required to deal with our past. Because the reality is that we all have difficult things in our past. We have difficult things that have been done to us, and sometimes we've done difficult things to other people. And what I've observed over the years is that when we have traumatic experiences or we inflict trauma on someone else, as time goes by, we start to push that down. And we tell ourselves that, well, if just enough time goes by, it'll all go away. And we convince ourselves that everything is fine as long as we push it down and let enough time go by. But then one day something happens. One day we find ourselves face to face with the trauma from our past. It might be running into a person from our past. It might be going to a place that's tied to trauma in our past. Sometimes it's just one of those emotions that just comes from nowhere and it shows up. And when that happens, if we haven't done the work to deal with our past, that encounter with our past can be cripplingly painful. Now, throughout this series, we look at the life of a man named Joseph. And as you recall, this is Joseph from the book of Genesis. And just as a real quick reminder, remember that we met Joseph back in part 1. He was a young man. He was part of a wealthy family, but he had a very difficult relationship with his older brothers. But he was very close to his father, and something we haven't really talked about, he also had one younger brother that he was also very close to. But his relationship with his older brothers was incredibly difficult. So much so that his brothers wanted to be rid of him so bad that they sold him into slavery. And they simply went home and told their father that he must have just died in the wilderness somewhere. And as you recall, this led to a really challenging time for Joseph. First, he was enslaved. Then he ended up imprisoned. And so he ended up in this period of his life where he had very little control over what he could do and how he could use his time. But he made really good decisions during that time. He spent his downtime well. He spent time in self-reflection, which then helped him to be a better person and deal with his relationships more effectively. And he also used that time to develop skills. And he actually developed a number of traits that he did not have when he started. He became a much more compassionate person. He became someone who understood how to deal with people. He also became a very effective leader, and he developed strong administrative skills. He understood how to manage resources and how to manage people. And as we saw in the most recent part, through a set of kind of really unexpected circumstances, Joseph gets an amazing opportunity. He ends up working directly for the Pharaoh of Egypt. Now remember that the Pharaoh is effectively the king. And the Pharaoh made Joseph the most powerful man other than Pharaoh himself in Egypt, which basically means that Joseph became the second most powerful man in the world as they knew it. And what Joseph's responsibility was is that they knew they had this time coming where there was going to be very bountiful crops and lots of food. And that would go on for a few years. And then afterwards, there would be several years of famine. So Joseph was tasked with managing that period of time, managing the food when there was lots of it, and making sure that there was food available when there wasn't. So as we pick up this week, Joseph's life is really different than it was in part one. I mean, at this point, Joseph's life is looking pretty sweet. I mean, he's been deeply assimilated into Egyptian society. Joseph is effectively a ruler. He's incredibly powerful. And even at this time, after a few years of being in Egypt, he's actually now married and even has 2 kids. So for Joseph, everything is going well. I mean, to put it in terms of the way we would think of it now, I mean, Joseph's got a great job, he's got lots of power, he's got an awesome family, and he's well respected in society. So with everything being so good now, that means that all that pain he had in his past, it's all gone, right? It's just forgotten. I mean, there's no need to ever deal with that again, because if things are good now, then I don't need to think at all about the pain that happened in my past, right? Now, the thing we want to remember is that the job that Joseph has is actually a really, really tough one. Is that there were these many years, we believe 7 years, where the food was very bountiful. So Joseph had to really closely manage the food supply in Egypt and store up as much food as he possibly can, preparing for that future of famine. And Joseph did an amazing job. And so now at this point, we're about 2 years into the famine. So the bountiful years are kind of in the past, and now we're 2 years into the famine. But it turns out, Joseph did his job so well that Egypt has even more food than it needs. Egypt actually has enough food that they can sell food to the surrounding territories. So what happens then is that people from the surrounding areas are now coming into Egypt to buy food. And as this famine goes on, the impact of the famine is moving further and further and further out from Egypt. And eventually, it actually reaches Joseph's family. So basically, they need to do something. So Joseph's family, Joseph's father, Jacob, is still alive. All of his brothers are still alive. So the father basically tells the oldest brothers, what you guys need to do is head into Egypt, and you got to buy us some food. If you don't buy us some food, we're not going to survive. So the brothers do what they need to do, right? They travel to Egypt, and they want to buy food. Well, if you come to Egypt and you want to buy food, who do you talk to? You talk to the guy who manages the food, Joseph. So after all these years, and actually more than a decade has gone by at this point since the brothers last saw Joseph, they walk in to talk to the man in charge, and that man is Joseph. Now the brothers don't actually recognize Joseph because he would look so incredibly different from the person they remember. Again, he's more than a decade older, but he's also not just their kid brother anymore. He's an aristocrat. He's a very powerful man at this point. And again, he's been fully assimilated into Egyptian society. He dresses like Egyptian. He cuts his hair like an Egyptian. Probably even wore some makeup. And his name has even been changed. He now has an Egyptian name. And of course, they're not expecting to see Joseph. This guy doesn't look like Joseph. So they just think it's this powerful man in charge. But now what about Joseph? Joseph immediately recognizes his brothers. And imagine what that was like for Joseph. He's standing here, and the very people who robbed him of his family, who robbed him of his freedom, and for at least a period of time, destroyed his life. If you're Joseph, those people are standing in front of you right now. And you are one of the most powerful people in the world that they know. I mean, Joseph could have done anything at this point. Joseph could have had them executed. He could have simply denied them food and sent them home to starve. And no one would have ever questioned it. Joseph had that kind of power. Imagine what Joseph is feeling in this moment. Imagine the emotions that are building up towards those brothers who are standing right in front of him right now. But those wouldn't be the only emotions, because seeing his brothers would have made him think of who? His father that he loved so much. So whatever anger he has towards his brother, for his older brothers, he's going to actually have thoughts and missing of his father. And he would have those same experiences towards that younger brother that he loved so much. So what Joseph kind of decides he's going to do here is he's going to actually kind of mess with his brothers a little bit. As he deals with his brothers, he doesn't reveal who he is. He takes on this role of being this very powerful person that he is. And at first he starts asking his older brothers some questions. But then he starts pushing on them a little bit. He says, you know what? I think you guys are here as spies. You guys are here to see if Egypt is actually weak, that this famine has actually made us available for attack. But the brothers start defending themselves. They're like, no, we're just a family of brothers who have come here to buy food. But Joseph just keeps pushing harder and harder. He's like, no, you are spies. You think Egypt is weak, and you want to take this as an opportunity. But basically, the brothers just keep pushing back. No, we're just here to buy food. And the brothers at this point would have been becoming visibly scared and upset because they know how powerful this man is that they're talking to. They know he could have them killed, and no one would ever stop him. So Joseph really keeps exploiting this advantage that he has. And he just keeps pushing on the brothers and accusing them of being spies. And as he does that, he starts asking them about their family. Now, they think he's doing this to give them a chance to prove that they're not spies. But the reality is he just wants to know how his dad's doing. He wants to know how his younger brother is doing. And there's no doubt he may be enjoying a bit what he's putting his brothers through at this time. And then he really starts turning the heat up. He actually starts pushing on the brothers so much, he finally throws them in jail. He says, you know what? I believe you guys are just spies. I'm going to lock you up. And that certainly would have been revenge, at least partially, for the time that he spent in jail. He lets them sit there for a few days, and then he decides he's going to try to execute a strategy to maybe get a chance to see his younger brother. He basically tells them that, you know what? You guys can go ahead and buy some food and take it home with you, but if you come back again, make sure you bring that younger brother with you. If you don't bring back that younger brother, I'll know you were spies. But if you bring him back, then that'll prove that you were a family. So he lets them leave, but again, he just keeps turning up the pressure on them. Because even though he let them buy food, when they leave, he sets it up to make it look like they stole it. So when they finally get away from Egypt, they are now fearful. They're afraid to ever go back because they believe that Egypt believes that they've stolen the food instead of pay for it. And they know they would have to take back that younger brother, and they don't know what would happen to any of them when they return. So their plan is just to have the food they've got, go back home, and never see Egypt again. But of course, the famine carries on. And eventually, they need food. There's no food growing. They've got to go back to Egypt and buy more food. So eventually, they bite the bullet. They have to take the younger brother, because if they come back without him, they've been told they'll be locked up as spies. And they travel back. And when they arrive in Egypt, who do they have to talk to? The guy who controls the food, Joseph. And Joseph again takes this time to start pushing on and messing with his brothers. And he actually sets it up again to make it look like the younger brother stole something now. Now, as he does that, he's probably enjoying making his older brothers fearful of what might happen to them. And what he's really trying to do here is set up a situation where the older brothers will leave, and he could spend some time with his younger brother and tell him the truth of who he is and spend time with him. But the way he's doing that is creating a lot of stress. What he basically says is, the youngest brother has stolen things because Joseph made it look like he had. He's going to be locked up, but you other guys can go home. Now, As he does that, think about what Joseph is doing here. He may have been trying to take a little bit of revenge on his older brothers, but what Joseph is doing is creating a lot of suffering. He certainly would have filled his older brothers with fear, which was probably what he wanted to do. But the harm that Joseph is creating at this point is not just limited to those older brothers. He's hurting other people as well. And what we're seeing happen here, both the older brothers and with Joseph, is we have a group of people who are being confronted with their past. A past that they probably felt was long behind them. Or in the case of the older brothers, what they did to Joseph. In the case of Joseph, what happened to him when the older brothers actually sold him into slavery. And even though they may have thought that because so much time had passed, and their lives were probably so different, they thought they were safe. But when faced with that past, it is clear that they are not prepared for it. Because in the case of the older brothers, the text actually captures and gives us a clear indication of what they're going through as they're having this experience with Joseph that they don't know is Joseph. The text actually tells us, speaking among themselves, they said, "Clearly we are being punished because of what we did to Joseph long ago. We saw his anguish when he pleaded for his life, but we wouldn't listen. That's why we're in this trouble." Now again, the older brothers have no idea that they're dealing with Joseph. They, again, just think this is the powerful man who manages the food at Egypt. But even not knowing that this is Joseph, look at what they immediately point to when things go so bad for them. They immediately point to the cause being what they did to Joseph years and years earlier. That tells us that those brothers are still filled with guilt for what they did. And if we look at that, what actually happens here is that years earlier, what those brothers thought would make them free, which was getting rid of Joseph, has actually imprisoned them with guilt for years now. Guilt that they've actually been carrying for over a decade. They have not done the work to face what they did. They've not confessed it to anyone. They've not tried to fix the problem. They have just hidden it and pushed it down and carried it with them for years as it's eating at them. Now, there's also something else interesting about the brothers' thinking. Now, their difficulty is because of what they did to Joseph. They're suffering in this moment because of what they did to Joseph years earlier. But notice that they explain it as punishment. They explain that what's happening now is sort of a wrath of God situation. And I think we often see this in our own lives, that at some point in time we do something that's wrong. And then later, when something goes wrong for us, we have this tendency to believe that God is punishing us. That again, it's kind of a wrath of God thing. But if we look at what's happening with the brothers, the explanation is actually much simpler than some kind of cosmic wrath of God thing coming down on them. What the brothers are experiencing is the natural outcome of their actions. Years earlier, they deeply harmed someone, and they made no effort to make amends. Then later in their life, they unexpectedly run into that person, and that person is now inflicting harm on them. In the past, they caused trauma for someone, made no effort to deal with that past, and then when they encounter their past, they are unprepared for it. And they are now experiencing the pain of that past. They are experiencing the natural outcome of the choices that they've made. But now, what about Joseph? What's going on with him? I mean, Joseph has been turning up the heat on his brothers more and more. And he's actually now told the older brothers that they can go home, that just the youngest brother is going to be imprisoned. But now what does that mean for the older brothers? Well, they're going to have to go home and tell their father that the youngest brother is imprisoned. And that would actually create a memory for them. They would remember now, more than a decade earlier, when they were so happy to be free of Joseph. And they went home and told their father that Joseph had died in the wilderness. And they saw what that did to their father when he heard that. And now they're going to have to go home and tell their father that his youngest son is imprisoned. And we don't know if he will ever be able to come home. Now, although Joseph is trying to harm and stress the older brothers, the harm is not limited to them anymore. I mean, imagine how fearful must that youngest brother be, thinking he's going to be in prison for some unknown period of time. And what has this whole situation done to his father? What's it going to do to his father? Remember that Joseph deeply loves his father, and he deeply loves this younger brother. Well, we actually get an indication of what things have been like for the father, because the text records an appeal that one of the older brothers makes to Joseph. It says, "For how can I return to my father if the boy is not with me?" In other words, if the youngest brother is not with me. "I couldn't bear to see the anguish this would cause my father." Joseph's attempt at revenge is not just harming those that he's targeting. It's harming others as well. It's actually harming the people that he loves. And what we're seeing here is that Joseph wasn't prepared for his past either. I mean, Joseph's life has been going well. And he probably felt that since everything is so good, any pain that he experienced in the past is in his distant past. But then, when that past unexpectedly showed up, Joseph went into a mode of revenge. Now, not as severe as it could have been. I mean, he could have had the brothers killed, but he didn't do that. But his revenge that he thought he could control was becoming more severe than he meant for it to. His revenge started causing collateral damage. It seems that for Joseph, his past pain still had control over him. Because even as his life got better, he had not been able to emotionally process the pain that he had experienced. And he hadn't been able to reach a point where he could forgive the brothers who had harmed him. So when he encountered those brothers, as he encountered that past, all that pain came out. And he started harming other people. And my friends, this is a real issue for all of us. Because in our past, we all have pain. And one day, when we least expect it, our past will show up. And if we've not prepared for that past can overwhelm us. And it can lead to crippling pain. It can harm us. It can cause us to harm others. So that's why I've encouraged you throughout this whole series to do a couple of basic exercises. Remember, we've talked about 2 exercises throughout this series. The exercise of evaluating the harm that's occurred within our relationships, and that 10-10-10 exercise, where each day we read our Bibles for 10 minutes, we journal about what we've read for 10 minutes, and then we meditate on what we've read for 10 minutes. And if we do that work, being willing to do that work changes our thinking. Because by evaluating the harm that's occurred in our relationships, helps us to better understand how our actions and our attitudes impact the other people in our lives. And then that 10-10-10 exercise helps us connect more deeply with God. It helps us to see God's love for us. And that helps us to begin to love others better. And together, those exercises enable us to prepare for our past. Because rather than hiding from our past or being crippled by it, when we eventually run into it again, and we will run into our past again, evaluating our experiences and facing the harm that we've caused gives us freedom. It allows us to walk forward with renewed life. And this is actually something we eventually see occur in Joseph's life. Because in that moment, as Joseph's older brother points out the anguish that Joseph's action will cause for his father, Joseph breaks down. He cries. And he finally comes clean with his brothers. And he tells them who he really is. And he's open with them and he's honest with them. And then that opens the door for healing. Now, to be clear, that healing doesn't happen right away. It's going to take time. But it does happen. So Joseph then has a chance to reestablish his relationship with his father, to reestablish his relationship with the younger brother that he loved so much. And he even begins to develop a relationship with his older brothers. And then one day, as more time goes by, and he's been open and honest, and he's evaluated his experiences, one day, while interacting with his older brothers, as he's reflecting on all that has happened to him, Joseph says something that would have been unimaginable. Joseph says something that would have been unimaginable at the start of his journey. He says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people." And what we see happening is Joseph is continuing to use his time well. He reflects on all that he's been through, and he has this hugely important realization that the pain of his past and all the challenges that he has faced and the time that he invested in growing through those challenges, that has come together to make him who he is. The good things that Joseph was able to do, the good things that Joseph did do, were possible because of the struggles that he faced. His willingness to understand the causes of his pain, his willingness to embrace the love and the power of God in his life, even during difficult times. That has all come together to make him who he is and enable him to do what he's able to do, something that no one else was in position to do. And my friends, that same opportunity exists for all of us, because we all have pain in our past. So let's invest the time to understand our pain. And let's invest the time to grow closer to God. Because what I want you all to hear is that there are great things that you are uniquely able to do. Doesn't matter if you're younger or you're older. There are some really important things that you are uniquely able to do. And the pain that you've experienced in your past is part of what uniquely qualifies you. So let's all put in the effort to heal from our pain, to be freed from our pain. And when we do, and when we embrace God's love for us in that process, we become positioned to achieve more than we could ever imagine. You're uniquely qualified to do something that no one else is in position to do. If we do the work to heal from our pain and embrace God's love for us, again, I'll say it, we can do more than we ever imagined. Let's be willing to do that work. Please join me in prayer. Lord, we are just so thankful for your incredible love. We are so thankful that your presence is always with us, even during our struggles, even during our pain. Lord, so we just embrace your love. We thank you for it. Lord, I pray for our whole family, everyone watching here, that they would feel your Spirit and your presence in their lives. Someone right now who's just experiencing deep, painful memories of something from their past, Lord, I pray that they would feel your comfort in that moment. Lord, and I pray that they would reach out to you, embrace the power that you provide to allow us to face our past, to do the work to heal from our past, and to go forward and embrace this amazing opportunity you've given us, Lord, to go forward with healing, surrounded and filled by your love, for each of us to do what you've uniquely qualified us to do, for each of us to impact and affect the lives around us as you've uniquely enabled us to do. And I pray all this in Jesus' name, amen.